But not quite all the way through. Why? Oh, okay.
We'll be right.
Okay. Okay, good to go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Ordinary Council meeting. You have the agendas in front of you, copy of the agenda. I'll start with our acknowledgement. We, the Greater Shepparton City Council, begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay respect to their tribal elders, we celebrate their continuing culture, and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Item number 2, privacy notice. This public meeting is being streamed live via our Facebook page and made available for public access on our website, along with the official minutes of this meeting. All care is taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, it is assumed that your consent is given in the event that your image is broadcast to the public. It is also assumed that your consent is given to the use and disclosure of any information that you share at the meeting, including personal or sensitive information, to any person who accesses those recordings or minutes. Councillors, is there any declaration of conflict of interest with respect to the agenda today? No? Okay. We'll move on to next item. Apologies. Do we have any apologies? And would a councillor like to note the apology?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councillor Azari, there's an apology on
Would you like to move a motion to note that?
absence.
Yeah, thank you. So,
I'll second the motion, Madam Mayor.
okay. All right, we'll go to the vote. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried, unopposed. Next is COVID-19 Council response. We all know that due to the COVID-19 crisis, our community and our local businesses, they are being impacted enormously, and we are concerned. Greater Shepparton City Council is acting decisively to support our community and businesses to lessen the burden of the significant economic consequences of COVID-19. I would now hand over to our CEO, Mr. Peter Harriott, to talk about the COVID-19 package.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. These are unprecedented times, and it's most unusual that we're actively winding down the economy when council and the business community are normally about cranking up the economy. But it's all about the health aspect, the formula that says that if we can take the load off the health system, slow the virus down, that's the main priority. And to do that, we need to socially isolate, distance ourselves, stay at home and observe the direction that's been given by the Prime Minister and the Premier and the Chief Health Officers. That direction, which is necessary to control the virus, is having a significant impact on our community, our own council organisation and businesses. So what we present tonight is the Greater Shepparton Economic Response to COVID-19, and it's the first stage package which we will revisit, most likely around budget time. But as this process evolves, we have more information and better ability to adjust. So this is a first stage package which addresses the issues that we're aware of at the moment, or attempts to provide some relief, understanding of the issues that are available. So it's a $1.5 million package. It's a significant package, and it's comparable with some of the larger metropolitan councils and the packages that are being offered there. It is in 4 parts. It's a residential component, community groups, businesses and advocacy. If I may go through them. First of all, under residents, residential ratepayers are able to enter into a payment arrangement or apply for financial hardship consideration regarding rates. Each case will be assessed on individual circumstances with outcomes customised according to the need of each. And we'll talk about this for businesses as well. And this is an important one because a lot of the community and businesses are asking in relation to rates at the moment. And across the board, rate relief would not be fair. It is a very blunt instrument to use because the reality is that some businesses in our community at the moment are doing reasonably well. There are others that obviously aren't, mostly retail and those sorts of businesses. So we need to be targeted, and that's what this first response item reinforces. Financial hardship. So make application, explain the financial hardship, and consideration will be given. We do this each year anyway, but obviously under the current circumstances, we'll expect a larger workload in this area. 2, no interest will be raised on residential rates from 16th of March 2020, the date a state of emergency was declared, until the 30th of June 2020. 3, extending the due date of animal registration fees to the 30th of June 2020. 4, continue to maintain a vulnerable persons register as described by the Department of Human and Health Services. The Pandemic Coordination Group will also work with partner agencies to assist the most vulnerable in our community. Council has been directed by the Chief Health Officer to prepare a pandemic plan. That pandemic plan has been prepared, and we've got responsibilities in relation to emergency management surrounding this incident as well. That pandemic plan clearly says we have a role to play with vulnerable people and those more disadvantaged in our community. So that's just recognising that aspect. 5, council staff will be allocated to assist community agencies where their services are in great demand, such as Shepparton Food Share. Whilst we're rolling back our organisation, we still have a range of essential services that need to be delivered. They include our waste services, our immunisation, our childcare, those sorts of things. So there are large parts of our organisation that still are continuing and needing to roll out important services. There are, however, some aspects where staff will be eventually stood down. It is out of that pool of staff that we can assist the community, and that is an example where we can assist Food Share, and more of that will be done, I am certain. Community groups. 6, waiver rent fees for community and sporting groups for council-owned land grounds from March 1st, 2030 to 30th of June 2020. 7, a reduction in rent of 50% for tenants of council-owned buildings or facilities from the 1st of March 2020 to the 30th of June 2020. Businesses, and there's a number of items here. Again, business ratepayers are able to enter into a payment arrangement or apply for financial hardship consideration regarding rates, and each will be considered on its own merits. 9, no interest will be raised on business rates, similar to the residential rates for the period mentioned before. 10, waiving of building and planning permit fees relating directly to the COVID-19 emergency until the 30th of June 2020. As I explained, some businesses are benefiting by, if that's the right, it's not quite the right term, but you understand what I mean by COVID-19, and some businesses are expanded. It's important that we respond to them in a rapid manner, and waiving of building and planning fees is a way of assisting in that regard. Waiving outdoor dining permit fees for 12 months, waiving goods for display permits for 12 months, and waiving advertising sign permits for 12 months, reducing the cost of food premises and health premises registrations for 2021. They've got a little bit of an unusual payment system where they forward pay, so payments have been made to November, so this will apply from the period after November. 15, facilitate and fast-track development applications where possible to assist businesses attempting to diversify and adapt or expand. And we've already got examples of where council have assisted in that regard right at the moment. 16, a small to medium business COVID-19 quick response grant of up to $3,000 to facilitate transitioning to online and e-commerce activity. I think this one is important and will be of significant value to various businesses. Funding that through some of the areas that I mentioned before that are slowing down or closing down because of the virus impact. So some of the areas in events and economic development that just cannot continue because of the restrictions. Some of our funding there will go to fund this program. 17, development of a small business expert support program to support local businesses, owners and staff to identify and deliver relevant training and development activities to assist them to adapt to the changes. 18, development of a suite of virtual seminars to support local businesses through the COVID-19 pandemic. And 19, in partnership with Grow Greater Shepparton, Committee for Greater Shepparton, Shepparton Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Shepparton Show Me, Tourism Greater Shepparton Lighthouse Project and the Community Goulburn Murray Community Leadership Program, develop a business portal to support local business as part of the Greater Shepparton Response Initiative. That follows from the press or media event last week, launching the Greater Shepparton Response. Advocacy, continue to lobby the state and federal governments, including the Federal Treasury, to increase and expedite federal assistance grants to allow local councils to provide targeted rate relief for residents and businesses. We need the federal and state government assistance in particular to this large financial area, or this area that will have a large financial impact in relation to rates. It's the only way we can deliver this in a meaningful way. So we've already combined with the Hume Region Local Government Network to write to the Federal Treasurer, and all the mayors of the region have signed off on that. Likewise to the State Treasurer, Tim Pallas. We've also been doing lobbying, if you like, to the Chief Health Officer in relation to other health-related items such as self-isolation. And 21, partner with state government to identify the most efficient process for our community to access upcoming state funding programs. There's a number of significant state and federal programs that will be rolled out that local government can access, and it's important that we do know about these and be ready for them and roll those out. Council will need to monitor the flow of this support and adapt as required, as I mentioned before, as further measures are announced. This is a first stage and will be more subject to advice from state and federal government around about the budget time. So I recommend that to the councillors for their information and knowledge. I advise the community of that package, COVID-19 package stage 1, and quite happy to talk to any community members, any residents, businesses, community groups and politicians alike as to what that means in further detail as we roll it out. But I just finished by saying this is at least a $1.5 million package. It is significant, and we're here to assist wherever we can. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Harriet. We'll now move on to item number 4, public question time. Do we have any public questions?
Do, Madam Mayor.
Pass on to us.
We've got one question from Robert McLean. Now, Robert's already advised that he could not attend tonight because of COVID-19 restrictions. Robert's question relates to a item on the agenda later on in the night, and Robert will be written response following.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to page number 2, item number 5.1. There's a petition proposing development of a recreational area in Oxbow Avenue. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
I'd be happy to move that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Councillor
Mayor.
O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'd be happy to
Do you
move
have a
the.
seconder?
The motion, Madam Mayor.
I'd be happy to move the recommendation that the council receive the petition requesting that the area near Oxbow Avenue be for development of a recreational area.
And I'll still second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Second. Thank you, Councillor Adam. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just very briefly, Madam Mayor, just to thank the residents that have come together. 38 of those residents have actually brought this land to our attention. It's great to see the community, really looking where they live and what can be done with some land close to their homes. So we thank them for that, and their petition has certainly been noted.
And Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just to say that it's good to see that the community's been proactive in bettering their own environment, close in and around where they live. So yes, very good.
Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? So we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Okay. Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item number 6.1 on page number 3. MAV Large Market Gas Supply Contract. Would a councillor like to move a motion, please? Councillor Summer?
I'd be happy to move the recommendation on page 3 as a motion that the council, 1, approve entering into the MAV procured Origin Energy large market gas contract for an estimated total value of $851,230.56, excluding GST, expiring on the 31st of December 2022, and 2, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal the contract documents.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe?
I'd be happy to second that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only that at this time it's difficult to estimate how much these contracts are going to cost in the middle of a pandemic that shut everything down. Maybe a lot less depending on how long Aquamoves is closed for. But the show must go on, I suppose, and we need to secure this lower rate for when Aquamoves does reopen.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just very briefly, that the contract had expired on the 31st of December, so it's just a procedure of actually looking at what we have from MAV and accepting that, again, that tender. Thank you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion?
Madam Mayor, I just want to say that I think this is good practice, obviously. It's not a huge reduction in the rate, but incrementally, I'm sure they will gain, and ultimately we'll be saving potentially thousands of dollars. I think that's one of the benefits of being part of the MAV. When things like this come along where we can have sort of a collective procurement of rates like this, it's great. So I fully support that.
Okay. Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Okay. So we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item 6.2 on page number 5, Shepparton Art Museum project variation. There's a recommendation on page 5. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Would a councillor like to move a motion, please?
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to
Councillor
move
Giovannetti?
the recommendation as a motion, and that is that the council authorise the CEO to approve all post-award variations for a cumulative total of $2,350,000, inclusive of GST, for the following. Contract 1865 is for construction, and contract 1732, which is for architectural and engineering works that relate to SAM.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Do I have a seconder?
Second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Adam, thank you. Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this motion is to allow the CEO to approve variations up to the total of the approved variation costs. Currently, the CEO's delegation powers allow him to make payments up to $500,000. and during a time of construction with a large project like SAM, there will be times when payments need to be made by a certain date, and council may not be in a position to approve those payments prior to them having to be made. So the purpose of the motion is to allow the CEO to make those payments. Now, I must stress that those payments relate only to the approved approved
Contingency budget.
Contingency.
approved variations that have been in the contract from day one.
Thank you. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Giovanetti. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Would a councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Summer? Councillor Sutton.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just not completely comfortable with this authorisation, as I believe that we have been elected to oversee all major expenditure, and it's a dereliction of our duties if we allow this council, allow this kind of thing to happen. Council meets every month, and if we need to meet, we can have special meetings during the month. So I don't really feel that we need to have this variation happening.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Yes, Councillor. Patterson.
Yes, just in reference to what Councillor Sutton said, the worst case scenario is that the virus does become a lot worse than it currently is, and the danger is that we can't meet as a council. Legislation currently doesn't allow us to meet by Zoom or any other means except for face-to-face. Might get to the stage we can't meet, and that will mean we might go 2 or 3 months without being able to continue on and get the variances in. If that's the case, we'll get cost blowouts, we'll get into trouble, and that's when we'll get into trouble and not doing our job, because we're not in a position to be able to do it. So it's very important this is in place. It's all been budgeted for. It all comes back to us. It is just a safety net that if things do get worse and we can't get a quorum, we couldn't get a quorum 2 weeks ago, and we can't have a meeting, that's when you get cost blowout. So it's very important that we pass this, and so the project can continue.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Summer.
Yeah, I've never been in favour of this project, and I don't agree with the timing of approving $2.35 million for a non-essential art gallery while people are lining up in Centrelink queues because of this virus. Some see the new SAM as a beacon of hope for ongoing progress in Greater Shepparton, as was discussed today, and that's fantastic, but it's really hard to share in that vision right now. I just see the rising costs. And hopefully time will prove this to be a worthwhile project, worthy of 50 million plus spent. But right now the focus should be on all the people in our community doing it tough. I wonder how they feel about this. Splashing money on SAM contingencies isn't tactful in my opinion. And it hasn't been in the budget from day one, or it wouldn't be called a variation. These are all things that keep creeping up. Every single time we move a motion about SAM, it just increases our risk. So I'm objecting.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would a councillor like to speak for the motion?
Not speak for it, but just to ask a question in response to that. Has in fact the SAM budget increased at all?
That's what I was about to say.
By about $10 million?
No, I mean, since the adopted budget that the council adopted, this isn't an increase in the budget. This is already incorporated.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. So I understand you spoke for the motion. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just clarifying Councillor Hazelman's comments, it's not an increase. It's actually
exactly
just
right.
making sure that we can pay our bills when we need to pay our bills. If we don't have a quorum, we need to have that safety net. We can't be just running around hoping that we all can get together. In these times of uncertainty, we have to have some sort of process in place, and this is what that is.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to have your right of reply?
Yeah, just finally, Madam Mayor, as I think Councillor Hazelman indicated, that this figure was always included in the contract right from when the approval was first given. And I'm confident that the CEO, as he does every month will report back to us on the variations that he's approved prior to the council meeting. And to me, that's just the status quo of what currently happens.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to...
Division, please, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Councillor Hazelman, Councillor Dennis Patterson, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Adam, Councillor Abdullah, Councillor Giovanetti. And those against? Councillor Summer and Councillor Sutton. Motion carried. Thank you. So next is item number 6.3 on page 8, purchase of land, 50 Raftery Road, Kayala. There's a recommendation on page 8. Would a councillor like to move a motion? I'd be happy to. Councillor O'Keefe.
I'd be happy to move that recommendation on page 8 that the council approve the purchase of 50 Raftery Road, Kayala for a purchase price of $462,000, including GST. Authorise the Chief Executive Officer to complete all necessary actions to achieve the purchase.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Patterson. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council became aware that this parcel of land was for sale, and it is an opportunity to obviously expand on some of our sporting facilities that we already have located at Kayala Park, so it's adjoining Kayala Park. The asking price was $500,000, but council did sort an independent valuation of the property, which resulted in an assessed value of $420,000, excluding GST. An offer to purchase, subject to formal council approval, of $420,000 was made on the property, and this property owner has accepted this conditional offer. So we're very pleased about that. It means we're going to be able to expand our facilities and recreational and sporting areas for our community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, just quickly, thank you. With Kayala, as we all know, is a growing area. That recreation reserve, used to actually work in back of a house and back over that, and it used to be cows and green fields. Now it's green fields with bowls and football and tennis and everything else goes on. It's amazing how it's expanded over the, I don't want to remember how long, but it has really gone ahead. And the whole community out there has grown and grown and grown with new estates popping up everywhere. And this is a unique opportunity for us to purchase some more land to extend what we already have. It will allow us to connect up some walking trails, some access paths. So it's a really good investment for the community for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Okay, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item 6.4. On page 12, there's a recommendation regarding Procurement Australia contract PA2110/0503, contract number 2026, mobile garbage bins. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Summer.
I'm happy to move the recommendation on page 12 as a motion that the Council 1 approve entry into Procurement Australia's contract number 2026 PA2110-0503 panel of suppliers for the supply and delivery of mobile bin products. 2, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal the contract documents. 3, note that the contract term is 2 years with an option of 2 by 1 year extensions, 2 + 1 + 1, for a total estimated contract value of $704,000, GST inclusive. 4, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to exercise the contract extension where satisfactory performance has been demonstrated.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sutton. Thank you. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, we are hopefully entering into a panel of suppliers led by Procurement Australia. I'm glad to see that 4 out of 5 of these providers are Australian companies. I think that's important towards moving towards a closed loop whole of waste economy. We need to start looking for local providers and finding ways to recycle locally and not ship it all overseas, obviously, as we have been dependent on in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Any councillor like to speak for the motion? No? Okay, so we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item 6.5, contract 2012, supply of advanced trees, panel of suppliers. There is a recommendation on page 15. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll be happy to move the recommendation on page 15 as a motion that the council, number 1, accept the tenders submitted by Established Tree Transplanters, Fleming's Nurseries Pty Limited, Green Corp, Local Tree Care Pty Limited, Rochester Native Nursery for contract number 2012 supply of advanced tree panel of suppliers. Number 2, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal the contract documents. Number 3, note that the contract term is 3 years with an option of 2 by 1 year extensions, for a total estimated contract value of $825,000 inclusive of GST. And number 4, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to award the optional contract extension periods where satisfactory performance has been demonstrated.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Summer. Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is the annual tree planting program. Each year we plant around 1,500 trees. The council did advertise for the supply of advanced trees via tender search, prioritised by lots of standards required, some being best quality, price and availability. It was a little bit disappointing to see that locally we didn't have perhaps the businesses that could actually accommodate this tendering process, but it is what it is, and we're very pleased to at least be able to have those trees available to us.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
I actually love this project and I think it's money well spent. In my opinion, greening Greater Shepparton is probably the single best initiative this council could do, and I'd like to thank the CEO for this because he did lead it. Trees have so many benefits: improving mental health, sustaining wildlife, they moderate weather extremes, they increase property value, encourage exercise, amongst many other things. And it's going to take probably many years for us to realise and appreciate the work that is being done now. It's a long-term initiative for future generations, and I fully support it.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Patterson.
Just quickly, Madam Mayor, it's not necessarily particularly about this recommendation, it's just a general comment about driving around Shepparton Route and even Tatura. The last couple of years I've noticed a substantial amount of trees have been planted over the last 15 years. Now they're reaching maturity, and it just gives the place a whole lot better look. Our main street is becoming shaded a lot of the time, and it's just, it costs money, I know, but it's well worth it. It's a great investment in the future, and it makes our city a lot more attractive.
Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? No? Okay. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item 7.1 on page 19. This is about Greater Shepparton Sports Hall of Fame, revised terms of reference and appointment of committee members. Continued. So would a councillor like to move a motion?
I'll move that recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank
The
you.
council approves the revised terms of Shepparton Sports Hall of Fame, Advisory Committee terms of reference, appoint the following 3 community members to the Sports Hall of Fame Advisory Committee for a term of 2 years, commencing on the 1st of April, which is tomorrow, and concluding on the 31st November 2022. And those 3 nominations are Daryl Butcher, Don Kilgar and Margot Costa-Delane.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, this committee was formed about 6 years ago. It was seen as something that the city was missing, recognising our sportsmen. There's a lot of famous sportsmen been born and raised and started their sporting career in Greater Shepparton, and this is a way of acknowledging them. We had our first presentation 2 years ago, and it was an extremely great success. We had people returning from all over the country and even overseas. I'm lucky enough to have chaired it this year, and Councillor Giovanetti has joined me. We have shared the chairmanship of the committee for the last couple of years. It is an ongoing committee because we are treading new ground from the start of this. There's things that have been identified that we need to change as we go, and that will always happen. It'll continue on. There'll always be changes over the years that we've identified how we can run it better, how we can better identify who should be on there and who should qualify. And we're very lucky that we've had the 3 members that have re-nominated, Daryl, Donna and Margot. They have done an absolutely sensational job. I think we've all been on committees where the community puts their hand up and helps us, but they've been the driving force behind that. And I'm sure Councillor Giovanetti will agree with me on that. If we're not moving quick enough, they're moving us, sort of thing. So they've done a great job. They're very passionate about it, and it's great. The only sad thing is there's 2 positions still available from the community, and I'd love to hear, or council would love to hear from anyone in the community that has a passion for sport and recognising people that have had an influence in our Greater Shepparton sporting field to come forward and help us in the future. But it's been very successful, and as I said, this is a new step. We'll continue to change and reassess, etc. And again, I'd like to thank the help that these 3 members have put in, and thank you very much for putting their hand up again.
Thank you very much, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
I can't add much more than what Councillor Patterson has said, apart from the fact that I totally concur with him in relation to Mr Butcher, Mr Kilgour and Mrs Kostalainen. They have been the driving force behind the Sports Hall of Fame. They have by far done the majority of the work, excepting, of course, our council staff. But from a committee point of view, their work has been exemplary, and I don't think the nights that we've had would not have been as successful if these 3 people had not been on the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor O'Keefe? Yeah?
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, just to say that, yes, we were all very much aware of the success of this committee, but and also the event. But I'm really looking forward to seeing where these wonderful legends do end up, as far as the community can also enjoy acknowledging the recipients of the Sporting Hall of Fame. So we've still got some discussion ahead of us with that, but I'm hoping it'll be somewhere obviously quite significant and easy to access, because we're very proud of these people, and we certainly like to share not only with our locals but people visiting as well the great success of our community, our sporting community.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak for the motion?
Madam Mayor, I just want to
Yes, Councillor.
alert everyone's attention to the 3 people that have been put on. Daryl Butcher, Don Kilgour and Margot Kostalainen. They've been legends themselves, I think, in this town for 40, 50 in some cases. So I just want to thank them for their input as well.
Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Okay, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Thank you. Next is item 7.2 on page 23, amendment to council's acknowledgement of traditional owners. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation printed on page 23, and that is that the council amend its acknowledgement of traditional owners to Greater Shepparton City Council acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathering today, the Yorta Yorta peoples comprising of 16 family groups, and pay our respect to elders both past and present.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Councillor Hazelman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This council has provided an acknowledgement since 2004, but without specifying a particular group. That's probably because at that particular point there wasn't a group actually recognised until Yorta Yorta Nation was recognised under the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Act of 2006. That's the registered Aboriginal party for the land comprising the city of Greater Shepparton. I would note that our near neighbours, Moira and Campaspe, formally recognise Yorta Yorta Nations as part of their acknowledgement. But also note that in June of 2019, the Council adopted the Reconciliation Action Plan unanimously from memory. And one of the key actions of the plan was to amend the current acknowledgement. We adopted a plan a little bit more than 6 months ago, and that plan said we would revise Council's official acknowledgement of traditional owners to specifically acknowledge the registered Aboriginal party in this area. So that was what we adopted unanimously in June of last year. What is being proposed by this motion is that we would formally acknowledge the Yorta Yorta people, and that's consistent with the Victorian Government's Aboriginal Victoria guidance on the acknowledgement of traditional owners. That guidance says that the Victorian Government has formally recognised traditional owners for the area where your event is taking place. You should specifically acknowledge those traditional owners, and that was reviewed only as recently as October of 2019. Now, there may well be people who would argue that the present acknowledgement is sufficient, and that misses the point and ignores the direct request for change from local Indigenous leaders. It also ignores the direct advice of the Victorian Government, the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council, Aboriginal Victoria, in our own Reconciliation Action Plan. Now, I seem to recall, Madam Mayor, at the Sorry Day breakfast where you spoke and spoke particularly well, you referenced our Reconciliation Action Plan as a major achievement for this council. I think it would be terribly disappointing if for the very first item out of that plan that the local Indigenous community came to us and asked us to implement, they got a knockback. The next time we wanted something out of that plan, wanted to talk to the Indigenous community, I think it would be a breach of faith in terms of, well, we asked you to do something, you didn't do it. I think that to reassure the Aboriginal community that we are serious about our Reconciliation Plan, this item should be passed.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Councillor Adam, would you like to
Thank
speak
you,
to the
Madam
motion?
Mayor. Just briefly, look, everything that Councillor Hazelman just said is correct from a technical perspective. Unfortunately, this issue is there's a lot of emotion tied up with this. I think councillors have been witness to that over the past, well, many years, if not the last few months specifically. We've heard from other Indigenous traditional owners who see it differently. However, I think this acknowledgement is probably the best possible resolution. I believe it does change in the fact that it acknowledges the 16 family groups. I think many of the people who may object to this from our Indigenous community are represented within those 16 family groups.
Councillor Adam, would you please speak loudly?
I'm
I
sorry,
think it's we are unable to hear.
trying not to spread the virus, Madam Mayor. Yes, so I won't repeat what I just said. I hope you heard it. But in any case, Councillor Hazelman is correct. We have to make a stand to a degree. Either we respect our previous decisions and go with the rules that we've basically set or not. But I want to acknowledge that this is very emotional to a lot of people. It's very personal, but I believe this will not hopefully upset anyone too much, basically.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Fern Summer and then Councillor Sutton.
Thank you. There seems to be a bit of a limited definition of what the Indigenous community is. It's not just Yorta Yorta. There are other tribes who may or may not believe they're a good fit with the RAP. So there might be some people out there thinking it's a great thing and some people out there who think it's equally not a great thing. So the direct request for no change from other Indigenous leaders is being ignored in this instance. And just because we reviewing the welcome is listed in the reconciliation strategy does not mean it has to be acted on. We don't act on every single action recommended in every single strategy. We haven't even gone out to public consultation on this, and already we've seen quite a lot of division and animosity. Naming one Indigenous group above all the others, even if it's in colonial law, it does send a message of division. It doesn't send a message of unity. The welcome we have now is very inclusive, as was predicted would be said. It broadly pays respect to all traditional owners, not just certain groups defined in that colonial law. The welcome to country is important. It's the cornerstone of Indigenous respect giving and taking, and it's an affirmation of each Indigenous person's connection to this land. So please don't think it's something we should just pass without considering. I think changing the welcome to this version will do much more harm than it will good. Emotions and trauma from the past is still very raw and current. We've seen that. Some people on both sides even argue that Yorta Yorta or Bangarang don't even exist. Now, these are serious allegations that cut to the heart, and they're not for us to decide by putting an overarching welcome on everything. So I'm not in favour of essentially dispossessing other tribes from their spiritual and physical sense of land ownership, because, say, the Bangarang, their belief that they own the land is every bit as real as the Yorta Yorta believing it's theirs, regardless of what the law says. So every decision we make has winners and losers, and I'm sorry it's gotten as far as a public meeting because it has caused hurt. I won't be taking part in this welcome if it is passed. I'd like to remind all councillors we have the option to continue using our current welcome, and I believe that better reflects the spirit of inclusiveness and reconciliation, which was the intention of the strategy in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Okay. Would any councillor like to, Councillor O'Keefe? No? Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Sutton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I understand that the Yorta Yorta is a political registered Aboriginal party, but it also, there is a lot of other Aboriginal tribes out there that don't recognise that they're Yorta Yorta too. I don't agree that we should be changing our acknowledgement, as it now pays respect to all of the original owners, inhabitants of this land, of which there are many, and by changing it, we are going to upset some, which I don't really believe is acceptable. So I'm not in favour of changing this recognition at all.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I think the problem we have here, and Councillor Hazelman's comment about, it's in our reconciliation action plan, well, we can't really make informed decisions until we have the informed information. So we have had numerous meetings with a broad range of Indigenous community leaders. We've had community members. This has gone on for councils for quite some time, and it's been very difficult. And I think after every one of those presentations, we have not had a clear direction. So that concerns me greatly, that we are now making a decision without having a united, which we're never going to have, an Indigenous community that all agree. It's very, very difficult. And I think, my positioning is I'm very respectful, and I have some wonderful relationships with our Indigenous community, very respectful, and I honour, their history, and it's very painful to many of them, to us, to even be telling them what they should be doing or what we should be doing within what they want. I found it very confusing. Every time we had a meeting, it was never clear. So I think to come back and vote on this without that clarity from the Indigenous community is not fair on any of our Indigenous community. I think it's something we need to continue those conversations until we can agree, until we can have some sort of direction. It's not us to really make this decision. I'm sorry. I think it's up to the Indigenous community, and I think the position we are in, it disappoints me, because I feel like we are letting some members of our community down, and it's a very sensitive issue. So I'm struggling with this one tonight. I just think at this point of time we needed more time, and I think it's how much time do you need to make this an easy decision. It's never going to be an easy decision. But getting back to the Reconciliation Action Plan, I'm really proud of that. There's so many things we're doing good within that plan. And I think to say we kick it off on a bad note, I think that's really unfair as well, because we can't make decisions without having informed decisions. And that meant meeting with the Indigenous community and getting that information. And it was very muddy. So I'm very disappointed that we have come to this that's divided. I'd like to see a unanimous, very positive outcome tonight, and that's obviously not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I think, and it gives me no pleasure to speak against it, that's something I think we've all grilled ourselves over this. It's been a long process. It's not decision we're taking, laying down. I think Councillor O'Keefe hit it in the head. It's a decision for the Aboriginal community to make. I know currently they're not communicating as well as hopefully they can, but I would encourage them to keep communicating and come to a mutual position, and then I'm more than happy to support them, whichever way it goes. But I don't think it's a decision for us to make about other people. I think they've got to come up with what they believe is right as a community, the Aboriginal community I'm talking about, and then I'm more than happy to support them. Yeah, that's where I sit.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Hazelman, would you like to have your right of reply?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Some of the comments are particularly disappointing when we say we don't know why it's here. The item is here because we asked for it to be here. Quite clearly in the reconciliation plan, and I'll read the specific action which we said. We would revise Council's official acknowledgement of traditional owners to specifically acknowledge the registered Aboriginal party and the 8 plans. We asked for it. That's why it's here. As part of the reconciliation action plan, we said we're going to change the acknowledgement. That's why it's here. And as a result of that reconciliation action plan, various members of the Aboriginal community approached Council. That's the test for Council. We said something, we do something in a plan. Now the indications are we're not going to do that. We're going to be inconsistent with the guidelines from the Victorian Government. We're going to be inconsistent with the recognition of Yorta Yorta Nations by the Aboriginal Heritage Council. And we're going to be inconsistent with the approaches from Aboriginal Victoria. We're the ones that are out of step here. The consistent approach from government, even our near neighbours, is to acknowledge the guidelines from the Aboriginal Heritage Council of Victoria. We're the ones choosing to go outside that, even though in the reconciliation action plan, we specifically pledged we would make this change. And now when it gets to the crux of it, we're going to walk away from it. I think the Aboriginal community would be perfectly entitled to ask us, what does our reconciliation action plan actually mean if we don't follow through on the commitments that we made?
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Those against?
We'll have a division, please, Madam Mayor.
Sure. Those in favour? Councillor Hazelman, Councillor Adam, Councillor Abdullah. Those against? Councillor Patterson, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Giovannetti, Councillor Sutton and Councillor Summer. Motion lost. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 7.3. Sorry, 8.1. Where was I? So 8.1 is about Council Plan 2019-20 Quarter 2 Progress Report. There's a recommendation on page 27. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Patterson, thank you.
I'll move the motion that the council note the recommendation 2019-20 Quarter 2 Progress Report, which provides details in relation to activities, the measures of success identified in the council plan 2017 to 2021.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Do I have a seconder? You can second that, Madam. Councillor O'Keefe, thank you. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. The further we get down the road with this plan, probably the less interest we have in it, to be truthful. It's an unfortunate fact that there's a lot of things have come along and have derailed our not our guidance on it, but we're not watching as close as we should have. Well, I must admit I'm not. But it's all getting through. We're doing it off. We're ticking it off. It was our master plan for the 4 years, but there's been potential to have it derailed currently. But the main objects, hopefully we'll have them all ticked off by the end of the 4 years, or 4.5 years, or 5 years, or 6 years, however long this council's going to sit for.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just very briefly, I am trying to keep a close eye on the progress made in achieving our key strategic activities and keeping an eye, obviously, on our budget and our council plan. So, moving along, there's obviously going to be some interesting time ahead, but at this point of time, what we've got in front of us is achievable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Next is item number 8.2, February 2020 monthly financial report. There's a recommendation on page 20. Would any councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Patterson? Do I have a
I'll move the recommendation that council receive and note the February 2020 monthly financial report.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hazelman. Thank you. Councillor Patterson, would you like
Yes,
to
thanks.
speak
Going to be
to the motion?
So, thanks, Madam Mayor. In realising this is a February report and we go into April tomorrow, and it's no one's fault that it's taken that long. I think what I'd like to talk on mainly is the stability of the whole report and where our council sits. I think, we're currently doing budgets, and when you read this report, it gives you a lot of confidence about our future. Basically, our operating performance is in the below the target band regarding our operating performance. Financial obligations, which is going to be extremely important in the future with what we're going to have to face as a council, is below the target band. So we've still got room to move into that. We're well and truly above where state governments like us to be. So that's an excellent thing. With our borrowings, our financial health is sitting right in the middle of the target band. So we're sitting there. Ever since I've been on council, and it's not just me. I know this council has always been very responsible financially, and it's never going to be more important to have been financially responsible than it will be in the next 6 to 12 months. Our perceived superannuation benefits that we got caught on in the first, I think it was my first term, when the markets went downhill quickly. We were $3 million short to pay our superannuation bill. Since that, this council's been responsible enough to put money away every year. We currently have $3 million put away to pay that if we get in this position, and that's what I call a responsible council. So this is, it assures me, and I'm not going to go into all the detail of it, it assures me that our council is a very financially responsible council, and there's never going to be a time more important to be financially responsible than the next 6 to 12 months. So I congratulate the staff who lead us on this. Councillor Teitzel, no, not there yet. Director Teitzel, he's probably sitting home having a scotch, relaxing and shaking his head, I know. But, these guys have done an enormous amount of work, and all our directors have been working 7 days a week through all this. And it's because of their hard work, in this particular case financially, that we find ourselves in a good financial position to face the challenges that are going to come to us. So I endorse this, and I won't go into the day-to-day running of the actual council, but it's all the summaries right exactly pretty well where you want them to be to head into what we're going to head into.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Hazelman, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, Madam Mayor. No.
Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Okay, so we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed.
Madam Mayor, I might just add that the vote's been taken, that we regularly report that the financial report shows year-to-date operating performance is within expectations. That's a standard thing. It backs up what Councillor Patterson was saying, that we generally do have very good financial reporting. That comment going forward is going to be much more difficult to achieve. And we know that, and Councillor Patterson also indicated this is a lag report, so we've only got information up to the end of February. By the third quarter review, we will be much better positioned to understand the impacts of COVID-19. We'll have been running for two months in that financial restricted sort of environment, and that'll give us a better position to position the budget going forward. But it is fair to say that things are changing financially, and it is good that we're in a strong starting position. But the The other thing to note was that we've spent 49% of our capital expenditure to date. That's a very good result for this time of year. But again, COVID-19 is having impacts on that with any materials that we're importing to Australia to help us with construction. That is putting pressure on, and just the distancing, social distancing is restricting our ability to deliver. So there's some of the things that we need to consider going forward in setting the budget. I might also note that we don't have the directors here tonight, and we would normally call on not Councillor Teitzel, but Director Teitzel to give us the financial report. That is part of the social distancing, the physical distancing that we're practicing here, and we encourage the community to do more and more of that. So it's not that they didn't want to be here tonight, it's just a socially responsible thing. It's part of our package of trying to assist the health system to lower that curve.
Thank you
Just
very
a
much.
quick right of reply, Madam Mayor. Councillor Teitzel could never handle a pay cut.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Herriot. I think that your comments are definitely valid, and we need to consider all the impacts of COVID-19 that will have on our financial position going forward. And the reason why our executive leadership team is not here today is also very much understandable. So thank you for making those comments. I'll move on to our next item now, which is item number, which is 8.3. Yes, item number 8.3, Instruments of Appointment and Authorization, Planning and Environment Act 1987, continued. So on page number 33, there's a recommendation. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to move the recommendation on page 33 as a motion. I won't read it all in detail, but I will read the majority of it. In the exercise of the provisions conferred by Section 147 of the Planning and Environment Act and other legislation referred to in the attached instrument of appointment and authorisation, which is the Planning and Environment Act 1987, Council resolves that the instrument of appointment and authorisation conferred to Ronan Murphy and Carl Byrne be revoked. Then there's a whole list of officers who we're recommending to be appointed as authorised officers. And item 3, the instrument comes into force immediately upon the Common Seal of Council, being affixed to the instrument and remain in force until Council determines to vary or revoke the instrument or the staff member ceases employment with Council. The Common Seal of Council is to be affixed to the instrument as attached.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Do I have a seconder?
No.
Councillor Sutton? Thank you. Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, as I mentioned, this is all a requirement under the Planning and Environment Act. The CEO has delegated powers in pretty well most areas of Council, but in this particular area, these appointments have to be approved or authorised by Council. And these are people who are working in the planning and environment area. It's something that we review twice a year, and that takes into consideration, as was mentioned, people leaving and new people coming in. We have to provide them with the authorisation to continue on with their work. So it's basically a procedural process, and we're complying with the relevant act.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Next is item 8.4, contracts awarded under delegation and contracts advertised but yet to be awarded. There's a recommendation on page 36. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll be happy to move that, Madam Mayor. On page 36, the recommendation that the Council note, number 1, contracts awarded under delegation authority by the Chief Executive Officer, number 2, contracts awarded under delegated authority by Director, and number 3, requests for tenders advertised but not yet awarded.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Councillor Adam. Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a list here in our agenda of some of our projects that have been tendered and have been successful. It's great to see some of these projects finally get up, particularly the Merrigum swimming pool getting their fence. That's fast tracking swim, which is great. There's obviously some projects still out to tender and they will be closing shortly. So it's really just a list of where we're at and with what those costs are for our community to see.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. There's obviously quite a list there. There always is. Just shows we're out there, or the council's doing their job. We're finishing some projects, starting others. Some are still being decided. However, I think it's a great indication of the work we're doing, and they're all worthy, so I won't pick any favourites.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Summer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only to say that this is a good opportunity to have a look at where we're at because this pandemic came up onto us quite quickly. Do questions need to be asked about the urgency of some of these items? I know we've already done the contract for a swimming pool fence, but people aren't allowed in pools. We might need to do a reshuffle. Timing of launching a SAM campaign around now. We could possibly rebudget a few of these into more secure projects moving forward. So it's interesting times.
Thank you. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you. Moving on to item number 8.5, instrument of delegation to the Chief Executive Officer. There is a recommendation on page 40. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
I'm happy to move that motion,
Councillor
Madam
Giovanetti.
Mayor. I will read it out in detail because I think there could be a bit of discussion on it. In the exercise of the powers conferred by Section 98(1) of the Local Government Act 1989 and the other legislation referred to in the attached instrument of delegation, Greater Shepparton City Council resolves that there be delegated to the person holding the position acting in or performing the duties of the CEO, the powers, duties and functions set out in the attached instrument of delegation to the CEO, subject to the conditions and limitations specified in that instrument. The instrument comes into force immediately upon the common seal of council being affixed to the instrument. It authorises the CEO to sign and seal the instrument of delegation to the CEO. Okay. On the coming into force of the instrument, the previous instrument of delegation to the CEO dated 19th September 2019 is revoked. The duties and functions set out in the instrument must be performed and powers set out in the instruments must be executed in accordance with any guidelines or policies of council that may from time to time adopt. It is noted that the instrument includes a power of delegation to members of council staff in accordance with Section 98(3) of the Act.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Do I have a seconder?
Second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, this is a procedural process determined by the Local Government Act in so much as the council is required to provide the CEO with delegated authority to undertake certain tasks up to a certain value. In this particular document, we are making provision for the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have in the delegated authority that the CEO will be able to award contracts up to $5 million if a quorum of councillors cannot be reached, and that is primarily for the COVID-19. If we, for example, are unable to participate in a council meeting, the CEO does have authority to keep the municipality running. So that is that is the major change.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Councillor Adam, do you have any? Do you want to speak to the motion?
Just to say that this is a necessary motion, obviously, as Councillor Giovanetti pointed out. Sorry, this microphone's not the right position. So it's a necessary motion, but in reference to Councillor Giovanetti talking about the $5 million, yeah, that was something I think we've all thought about over a period of time, whether it's necessary or not. But as Councillor said, it is necessary. And by us not granting this, it doesn't show much faith in our CEO to make the right decisions at the right time. We have our opportunity not to agree with or to resist anything that he's done each year, obviously. So I can't see this being an issue at all. It's just a good process to get over and done with.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Sutton?
Just the same comments I made before. I think it's a dereliction of our duty as councillors, and I don't agree that we should be able to let the CEO provide up to $5 million in the event that a quorum can't be reached. I don't think that's right. Who's to say that the CEO won't come down with a COVID or any of the other staff? We can't say that. So I just think it's a long bow, and I just don't agree with it at all. It needs to come to a council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, mainly in reference to what Councillor Sutton does. The position is the CEO at the time, right? It's not a person, right? So if our current CEO comes down with virus, there is someone else that's automatically placed in that position. The place can keep operating. If we were to go into get in a situation where we couldn't get a quorum and our CEO was ill, the whole place would close down currently, and then we'd have ratepayers grabbing us by the throat because there'd be cost blowouts. There'd be no building permits being issued. Now, this is just simply good governance, preparing for something that might and hopefully will never happen. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Summer.
Again, it's just the $5 million contract award if a quorum cannot be reached. This is on top of the $2.35 million delegated for the new SAM variations. From memory, it's a bit hazy, but I believe I objected previously when this delegation was set at $2 million. So my reasons for that objection haven't changed. So with the real threat of coronavirus, it's far more likely we will not reach a quorum, which we've already experienced this month, which is why we're having a late meeting. I personally think the delegation should be reduced, not increased. Our projects are much the same as prior to the coronavirus, $2 million, more than ample, split into stages if necessary. At this stage, there's not a mention of reporting back to us, so we have to wholeheartedly trust the CEO, which I'm really pleased that most of us do. But I think $5 million is excessive and it's a breach of our duties.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, what happens if we do get to that position and we don't have the money there to actually continue business as normal? I would rather have more than what we need than not have enough. And I think this is just a process. It's good business. It's making sure that we can continue to do the work the council needs to do. What is the price? What is the figure we put on it? You know, it's difficult to say we're all going to agree on that. So to me, it's really making sure that we can continue to run council, continue our duties within the community. Let the CEO have that opportunity to have the funds there that is needed. So to me, I find this confusing that there's so much debate against this one.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to use your right of reply?
No, Madam Mayor, I think we've adequately covered it all.
Thank you. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Motion carried. Thank you. Next is item number 9.1, proposed naming of Tatura Park Outdoor Arena. There's a recommendation on page 43. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, it gives me great pleasure to move this, in fact. And that recommendation is that the Council, 1, acknowledges the significant contribution of Kevin Gunnar Ryan to the Greater Shepparton community and notes the request and community support in naming a component of the Tatura Park Exhibition and Equestrian Complex in recognition of his contribution. 2, we understand the naming rules for places in Victoria and the Geographic Place Names Act 1998 limitations and accepts the response from the Registrar of Geographic Names to formally name the outdoor arena location after a living person. 3, proceeds to informally name the Tatura Park Exhibition and Equestrian Complex Outdoor Arena as the Kevin Gunnar Ryan Outdoor Arena through placement of signage at the location.
Thank you,
I'll
Councillor
second the
Hazelman.
motion, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Adam. Thank you. Councillor Hazelman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'm sure others will speak and acknowledge the contribution that Gunner has made, not just to the localised Tatura community, but to the broader Shepparton community itself. And noting that that contribution was formally recognised by the Governor-General last year, the year before, 2018. And so it's appropriate that we as a council also acknowledge his contribution. I've known Gunner for a lot of years, and I know that he's been involved in so many different things across the community, whether it's been football clubs of Tatura and Merrigum, his single-handed contribution as far as the Tatura Dairy Week operation goes, and his ongoing contribution at Tatura Park. I think it's very appropriate that council acknowledges, recognises the work that Gunner has put in. I do note that the geographic place names say that to formally name something, you can only do it if the person is dead. I think Gunner would much rather the informal approach than. Yeah, and I look forward to when it's an appropriate point of time that the council will have some sort of unveiling of the sign ceremony at Tatura Park where we can celebrate that occasion with Gunner.
Thank you. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the
Yeah,
motion?
look, just briefly, I haven't known Gunner as long as obviously Councillor Hazelman has, but I think this is a no-brainer. Anyone that's put in almost 4 decades worth of council and community service deserves this honour, even though it's not as grand as we'd like it to be. I think it's a good start.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion?
At
Any
your
co-
own peril.
Yeah,
Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Yes, Councillor Patterson?
I've given this a great deal of consideration. That's probably all I wanted to say, but no, I think it's so well deserved. I'm sure he's not listening to this. He's been a legend in Tatura. He's done an enormous amount of work. And if you don't doubt that, just ask him. You'll find out very quickly. But it's well deserved. And, I know the legislation come in that you can't name people after people that are alive. But it's... that's right. I'm glad we're doing what we're doing now. He's so well deserved, and he needs to see some recognition for the work he's done. And besides, he's just paid $300 for a brand new sign that says Kevin Gunner Ryan. He's probably putting it up in the shed now. But Mark, he's been terrific for TAT. He's been terrific for the whole region. I congratulate him, and as Chris said, I'm looking forward to being able to get over there and let him buy us a beer and thank us for doing it. And some things that happen in council are great, and this is one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor O'Keefe. Oh, there are too many hands. All
Just
right,
everyone wants to speak.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Just very briefly, just Councillor Patterson, I think it's really important to acknowledge the community actually were the ones that actually put this up and, really supported Gunner, and it's fantastic to see that. And I think it is a shame when we have these incredible community members that, often it's after they are deceased that the community get to, really raise the incredible opportunities and contribution they've made. So, yeah, it's definitely the community that has put their hand up. The Tatura community love him over there because of his, obviously his investment in the town and the community. So, yeah, well done to the community for acknowledging Gunner. Well deserved.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Who else wants to speak to the motion? Councillor Giovanetti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, anyone who can be involved in local government for 30 years needs more than a sign given to him on an equestrian oval, considering Gunner does most of his business there anyway at that particular site. But Gunner Ryan is still extremely interested in council affairs. Every time I go to the bowling club in Tatura, we have a chat about his thoughts on various aspects of council. And he is very forthcoming in those thoughts, as always. But look, I do congratulate Gunner on this recognition of his efforts for the whole of the municipality over 30 years.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've known Gunner for a long, long time, and I also acknowledge the enormous amount of work he's done for Tatura and especially for the development of Tatura Park. He's just been there all the time, working away and just doing a great deal of work to make it what it is today. So we'd like to thank Gunnar for what he's done.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Any other councillor would like to speak to the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Summer.
Thank you. I sit with Gunnar in the Tatura Park Committee, so it was interesting seeing this play out, and it is an unusual request since it is an unofficial naming, but it's highly unlikely to interfere with any emergency services response teams being an outdoor arena. Gunnar has a very long legacy of service for Greater Shepparton, and especially Tatura, which is endearingly named the jewel in the crown. And the myth is that his family stretches back to the original settlers there, the Ryans. Another myth could be true. You guys might know more than me. Gunnar was the youngest councillor ever elected, and it's a fact that he has maintained his tenure since 1972 up until last term. The only time he wasn't re-elected is when he wasn't allowed to put Gunnar on his election material, so nobody knew who he was. So he was awarded the Taturian District Citizen of the Year, as well as an Order of Australia for his lifelong commitment to the community. So as someone that I consider a friend and a mentor, I couldn't think of anyone more deserving for this honour, alive or dead.
Thank you very much. I would also just like to add that this acknowledgement is very well deserving, and it's high time that we put this motion in, and fully endorsed, and everything that all of you have said, I agree, and we'd just like to thank Gunnar for his amazing contribution to our community. And he's still very active and very passionate about the things that he has been doing. So well done, Gunnar. I will now ask for the vote. We'll go to the vote now. All those in favour? Motion carried unopposed. Thank you.
It's close.
Yeah.
Next. So next is item number 9.2, Climate Emergency Declaration. This is on page 46. Would a councillor like to move?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 46 as the motion.
Motion, councillor.
Motion is that the council declare a climate emergency, adopt a 2030 zero carbon emission target in relation to Greater Shepparton City Council. Point 3, develop action plans to support the climate emergency declaration and the 2030 zero carbon emissions target in relation to Greater Shepparton City Council.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'll second the motion.
Councillor Hazelman. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just briefly, Madam Mayor. You may not think that after I finish, but I'll begin. Look, thank you for the opportunity. Look, to some people, in the midst of an unprecedented global emergency such as the current pandemic clearly is, it may seem inappropriate or an inappropriate time to declare a climate emergency. With all of us being forced to focus on life-changing behaviours to combat and bring the coronavirus pandemic under control, prioritising our collective response to this emergency is crucial for the health of our citizens and of our economy. Whether we like it or not, this microscopic speck of DNA or RNA has instantly dictated a global response to a degree hitherto unseen in modern human history. With the expert guidance of the world's most eminent health experts, we will ultimately overcome this virus, whilst diminishing its carnage along the way. At this crucial time in human history, we all turn our eyes and our ears anxiously yet confidently to the medical scientists whose knowledge and advice we trust in. Yet for a less instantaneous, seemingly imperceivable looming crisis such as climate change, we discuss, debate and even dismiss. Yet inevitably and incrementally we adapt. Whilst along this journey we question the science from eminent experts of the same calibre who we are currently entrusting our lives to right now. I believe we truly are the frog in the pot in this instance. The fear and anxiety we are all currently feeling is a snapshot from a future crisis that can't be overcome with physical isolation or an inevitable vaccine. Climate change is something we still have the ability to affect. As Australians, we and every other nation must act now. Proactive social behavioural changes accompanied with political foresight and leadership will flatten the climate change curve, but not at the expense of our economies, which are currently suffering now. On the contrary, existing and developing technologies will provide economic opportunities not seen since fossil fuels took the world by storm over 100 years ago. Madam Mayor, when our own mortality is under threat, we act immediately, as we must. However, when the lives of our children and grandchildren are at risk, we dither, we procrastinate about the veracity and credibility of the science. Some people may consider declaring such an emergency as alarmist, especially in a time of heightened anxiety that we're all feeling right now. To them, I say this declaration can be compared to the illumination of the engine light in your car's instrument panel. You see it, and you understand that if unattended, a major breakdown awaits. You must only ignore this at your own peril. I and many others, including our youth, who obviously have the most to lose, choose not to ignore it. This motion should not be feared. It should be embraced for the very reason of reducing anxiety, by knowing that we have a plan that meets this challenge head on.
Time is.
And I've finished that.
Okay.
No, actually, I haven't, Madam Mayor. I've got another paragraph, if
Would you
that's
like?
okay.
Do you want an extension?
About 20 seconds, if that's okay.
Is everyone okay with that? Okay.
For
go
this reason, I ask councillors to support this motion to set an example and help spread the message to our community and beyond that inaction is not an option unless we wish to gamble the future of generations to come. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor Adam. Councillor Hazelman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, and fully support the comments of Councillor Adam. I think particularly at the outset when he talked about this is not a debate about science. That was resolved many, many years ago, leading to international conferences at Kyoto, Paris, Copenhagen, and adoption by governments all around the world of emission targets and timelines to meet them. The call for a climate emergency, we've seen people coming to the council to make presentations. We've seen young people through the Shepparton Statement, and we've seen that this movement is growing around the world. 8 million Australians live in jurisdictions that have already declared a climate emergency, a third of Australians. 819 million citizens around the world live in jurisdictions in 28 countries which have declared a climate emergency. Rather surprisingly, including the United Kingdom, which you would not have bet money on that. So I think it's time for this council to seriously consider the representations that people have made to us. And I haven't had people in the community make an approach to us not to do this, but I've had many, many people approach me saying it's time for council to show some leadership. It's been suggested the language is alarmist and has impact on young people. Well, over the last 18 months, we've seen millions of young people go on a school strike. They've marched in the streets around the world and they've demanded that governments take action. They're the people, they are seriously alarmed that our generation has let them down and they are looking for action. Those millions of young people are seriously alarmed at our lack of action. And it's time for council to show leadership on this issue. Action plans without the overarching statement, they're diminished. Promote the plans without emphasising the reason. And if implemented, what is the reason? Why are we doing these plans? Well, the reason is we've got a climate emergency. There's a serious situation here. But we want to ignore that and just focus on the action plans themselves. People say, why is this action plan? Well, I think that's pretty obvious. And we've had extensive community support, representation and presentations. It's time now for council to act and get on board with the other 29 Victorian councils that have already moved in this direction and the state governments of Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia and the ACT, plus the MAV and the Western Australian Local Government Association. They've all moved in this direction. I can't see the logic and reason why council wouldn't follow suit.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Giovanetti?
Madam Mayor and councillors, look, I'm aware of the community concern re climate change and the effect it will have on us into the future, but calling it a climate emergency is, in my opinion, alarmist and sending a wrong message to the community. I do believe that we need to do all in our power to lower our CO2 emissions as good leaders in our community, and I fully support the items 2 and 3 in the recommendation, although I certainly do not support item 1. If we follow, if we're in agreement to the last two items in the recommendation, it'll allow us to develop a plan, cost it, and have it implemented. In my opinion, our council have been leaders in the local government industry in relation to climate change. We have solar panels on most of our buildings and plan for the others to have panels installed. We have planted and will continue to plant thousands of trees over the last few years. We purchased electric cars. We've approved solar farms and partnered with local environment groups to establish a community solar farm in Mooroopna and are being resourceful with our waste. What we haven't done is to communicate this to our residents in a manner that would make them aware of our efforts. We as councillors had the opportunity to listen to a number of experts in the field of climate change and have spoken with local concerned citizens. If my memory serves me correctly, none of the experts that we had met with called for climate emergency, sorry. They certainly gave us the facts that if we as a community keep on the path, then our seasons will be hotter, rainfall less predictable, and often more rain in a shorter period of time. We were told that Australia is producing 3% of the world's CO2 emissions, and that includes our coal exports, which adds to that percentage figure greatly. If we reduce our CO2 emissions to zero by 2030, this will have a 0.1% effect on the world's CO2 emissions. Not a significant figure, but if all other countries do the same, this will reduce the overall impact of climate change. We cannot speak for other municipalities, states or countries, but we can commit to a change in how we in Shepparton reduce our CO2 emissions. There is certainly anxiety about climate change and what would occur in the future. I believe by showing leadership in what we are doing, we can reduce the anxiety, and declaring a climate emergency will only increase the anxiety in the community. And contrary to what Councillor Hazelman said about contacts from the community, I don't know about other councillors, but I've had quite a number of people contact me and say that we can't be serious in declaring a climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion?
Look, I will.
Councillor Patterson.
I've found this extremely difficult, like most would have. I do not have one doubt that I support 2 and 3. I have concerns about number 1, and that is the word emergency. We're at a vulnerable time in our community. I'm just concerned that this could send a few people over the edge. I hope not, but the actual figures and everything is pointing towards that we have an issue with our climate. There's no doubt about that. We haven't had a wet spring for 20 years. Our climate is changing. So I think we have to take note of that. We have to do something about it. I'm not, as I said, I'm going to vote for it now, and I wasn't going to vote for it originally because of the emergency word, but I think we can get tied up sometimes in council recommendations because of one single word. And I think this is maybe one of those times. I think the crux of the whole thing is we need to do something. They're telling us, and all the experts are telling us, we don't become like Griffiths. That means you have to grow a whole lot of drugs and everything else, I suppose. But, and that's no disrespect to the people of Griffiths, but our climate is changing. It's getting warmer. That is pretty well accepted by everyone. And it really, I found it really hard. As I said, I was going to go a no, but now I've jumped the fence and I'm going to go a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't agree that we need to declare a climate emergency. I think that is alarmist. I agree with Bruce. I have had a lot of people in the community speak to me and say they don't want an emergency. I think if we keep going, doing what we're doing, we're planting trees, we're putting solar panels on roofs, we're doing a lot of things in this space that we should continue to do. And I just think the emergency, it's not an emergency at this stage. The coronavirus is an emergency. I think a car crash on the causeway is an emergency, but I don't think climate change is an emergency. I think it's something that is happening maybe, and it's something that we should be doing. I think the weather patterns have changed, and I don't really know whether by us declaring an emergency, anything else is going to happen. So I'm really not in favour of it at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Summer.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting agenda. A lot of these items came not from councillors themselves, but from the CEO, which is good that there's initiative there, but they're not all being supported 100%. Look, I think we have enough to deal with now with the coronavirus, and it's ironic that this pandemic has significantly decreased emissions right across the globe. However, people are nevertheless anxious and fearful. That's just how people are feeling. And I have to ask what purpose calling a climate emergency serves. So as Councillor Giovanetti said, we can still strive towards all the objectives of building a sustainable planet without the alarmist language. It's unnecessary. This community has suffered floods, the falling Australian dollar, drought, fire, and now COVID-19. And I think it's safe to say that most of us are suffering crisis emergency fatigue. Now is not the time to be compounding this stress. People talk about, the children, they're quite upset. Well, of course they are. They're the most vulnerable here, and they're getting messages from people like us sitting around a table calling out, it's a climate emergency. I mean, I don't know if that's helpful. It's evidence-based that they have higher rates of anxiety and depression over climate change. And this with COVID-19, we don't know what impact that will have moving into adulthood. Also, the youth didn't push for the Shepparton Statement. We put that idea on them. We don't know whether we could be planting ideas instead of nourishing ideas. So I think we can still do everything we can to reduce emissions. We can change the planet. We can make things better. We can make our children proud of us, but we can do that without being alarmist.
Thank you, Councillor Summer.
Madam Mayor, I
Would you like
don't
to?
want to end the debate. Appropriate. I need to correct. CEO put this forward. This came as a request from John Pettigrew, Terry Court, and the likes of Rob McLean. They wrote to us and asked council to declare a climate emergency. It also came from the likes of young Emily, who ran the mall march around the block. So it's a report that's been prepared in response to people from the community.
Shepparton Statement I referenced.
Let Councillor Summer, let Mr.
talking.
Harriet finish what he's saying.
Actually asked council to consider it. So we do as we would normally do, put a report together and present it to you. It's as simple as that.
Thank you
Point
for
of
your
clarification, I said the Shepparton Statement wasn't brought to us by the youth, not this item.
I recall that you said both, so about
Also,
the item
youth
as
didn't
well
push
as
for
the Shepparton Statement.
We put the idea onto them.
All right, thanks for making your point, Claire, and thanks to you, Mr. Harriet. I'll just move on. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? I think we're doing against the motion, yeah. Councillor O'Kane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's not really against the motion. It's not against, acknowledging the climate. I mean, it is a priority of council. Climate is a priority of council. We are not dismissing that in any shape or form. I do feel declaring it as an emergency is be too much of an alarmist. I think the community at the moment, even outside the moment, I think, we need to, as Councillor Hazeman pointed out, 29 councils out of 79 have declared a climate emergency. There's still a lot of work to be done. We are acknowledging that work. We are working on that work, and we are making the changes and the differences within our community. This is a forefront conversation. It's definitely in the mind of everybody, many people within our community. Climate is an issue, but declaring a climate emergency, I don't feel at this point of time is what we need to do. There's still so much conversation going on. There's a lot of strong evidence about the climate. There's a lot of, conflicting conversations out in the community. I think we're doing a lot, and we will continue to do a lot. We're certainly, advocating to continue to be as strong as we can when it comes to our climate. So I fully support item 2 and 3, but I am concerned about declaring a climate emergency at this point of time.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. With that, I think everybody has had the opportunity to speak. Councillor Adam, would you like to use your right of reply?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Please go.
Look, I've heard a variety of opinions and fair enough, I think some people make some valid points, but in respect to the actual wording, in this context, the word emergency isn't something comparable to my hair being on fire right now. This is a really putting a title onto a movement. A climate emergency is about a movement around the world. It starts small, it swells, it evolves, and it's about changing the hearts and minds of people to understand that this is not an emergency today or tomorrow or next week, but it's all pushing and leading towards a drastic situation in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years down the track. And if we just avoid or ignore the evidence we're getting from, as I said earlier, the same experts, we turn our heads to the experts now and we believe, we hang on every word they say. But when it comes to climate change, we don't tend to take it as seriously. So if we had been for the last 30 or 40 years, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion right now, but we haven't. So the emergency, and I think the bulk of the people will understand and differentiate between what an emergency means in a coronavirus sense or a car accident sense as compared to this. This is all about trying to avert actually an emergency in future years. So I can't see the big discussion around the wording, but it has to have a heading because what we've been doing doesn't seem to be enough, basically. And the anxiety issue, I don't think my grandkids or kids are going to be more anxious tomorrow because we declare this or not. The anxiety comes about people realising that the councils or the government or the leaders of the community don't take it seriously. That's where the anxiety, I think, really sits. That's all I've got to say. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Adam. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Okay, so we have 4 and 4, which is a tie. And in that case, the Mayor has to use a casting vote. And my vote is in favour of this recommendation, of this motion. The motion carried. Thank you.
But division, please.
Division? Okay. So those in favour? Councillor Hazelman, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Adam, Councillor Abdullah. Those against? Councillor Summer, Councillor Sutton, Councillor Giovanetti, and Councillor O'Keefe. And the casting vote is motion carried, and which means that the motion as per page 46 recommendation about declaration of climate emergency has been carried. Thank you. We'll now move to our next item, which is 10.1 on page 54. We have a recommendation about councillors' community interaction and briefing program. Could a councillor please move a motion?
I'll move this very controversial section of the agenda, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And what's your motion?
Yes, the council's, well, it's Council Community Interaction Briefing Program. It's a list of
Page 54.
I might take all that back, hang on, sorry.
Page 54.
That the summary of Council's Community Interaction Briefing Program be received and recorded as Assembly of Councils be noted. I
Thank
thought
you,
it was going to be an easy one.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hazelman. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, it just shows that, there's lots going on. We're trying to get out there and our Mayor's leading us, getting out there for as much as we possibly can. Councillor Summer's still getting to the Chura Park Advisory Committee meeting to chat with Councillor Gunnar Ryan. There's lots and lots happening, and it has to keep going. We've got to keep the wheels in motion. There will be some restrictions on what we can get to, of course, but it's important we do what we can to be a part of the community.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Hazelman, do you want to speak to the motion?
Oh, I resist the temptation. Look, I do note on here there was a sod turning event, and there tends to be one of these almost every month. I reckon the poor sod's getting sick of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Over you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just very briefly, obviously now with the coronavirus, a lot of our committee meetings and our community engagements have stopped. So I do encourage my fellow councillors to, see if we can support the community in a different manner. We certainly need to be out there doing all we can within a safe environment, whether that's just, talking to people, encouraging people to stay home, stay safe, and that's certainly my message at the moment. But we have seen our calendars almost diminish our commitments within the community, so it's a very trying time for everybody, and it's an important time for us to, support the community more than ever. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Would anyone else like to speak for the motion, to the motion? We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Thank you. So our next item is 11, urgent business, not included on the agenda. Is there any urgent business? No. Nil. And number 12, confidential management reports. There's a recommendation on page 55 around designation of confidentiality of information. Could a councillor please move a motion? Ever?
Following
In accordance with the
items, where are they? Where are those following items?
12.1. Support of advance. 12.1. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
Oh, yes.
Councillor Adam,
Motion, thanks, Madam Mayor.
which is
Which is in accordance with section, is that correct? Mr. CEO, have you got a comment?
good to go.
In accordance with section 77(2)(b) of the Local Government Act 1989, the Act, the Council designates as confidential all documents used to prepare the following agenda item previously designated by the CEO in writing as confidential under section 77(2)(c) of the Act. Reports 6.5, contract 2012, supply of advanced trees, panel of suppliers. This document relates to a contractual matter which is relevant ground applying under sections 89(2)(d) of the Act.
Thank you.
That's
Do I have a
all, motion.
seconder? Councillor Sutton, thank you. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Not at all. I think I explained it in great detail by reading out the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
No, thank you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Okay, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Motion carried, unopposed. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this agenda today, and
Madam Mayor, just before you do close,
Sure.
may I say that COVID-19 is consuming us. It's consuming the community. And as I said at the start of the meeting, it is impacting on us, and we've responded in part to that. But we will get through this, and this is a message that we also want to get out to the community. We will get through this, and we will get to the other side. And therefore, it's important that we do continue our strategic planning, and the council considers the business that it considers, such as what you considered tonight, some very important matters. Some we debate, and some we go one way and some go the other way. That's business, and it's very important so that when we're in that time, whenever that may be, this work is setting us up for that. So I think the community realise that it's not all about COVID-19, although it is, a very big part of our life at the moment. There are other things to consider as well, and that's appropriate that we do.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's definitely so true that we have to, although we are facing this emergency, and our priority is on the well-being of our community, but council also has a business to continue. They are continuing. So as a part of our continuity plan, we do have to make decisions, strategic decisions, and hence we discussed some of the items today around delegations, and so that we continue to make decisions, and any untoward situation doesn't stop us from making important decisions. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone, and to the community out there, stay safe and stay home. We will get through it together. Thank you very much.
And
And I declare the meeting closed at 18 past 7. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Didn't thank the gallery.